I was 17 when Grandpa Joe taught me how to read the land the way other people read books, running his weathered fingers through the black Iowa soil while explaining how you could tell the health of Earth by its color, texture, and smell. The 160 acres had been in our family for 4 generations, purchased by my great-great-grandfather with money saved from working the railroad, back when a man could still buy a future with calloused hands and stubborn determination. "This dirt has our blood in it, Danny," Grandpa would say, letting the rich soil fall through his fingers like dark snow. Every generation of Kellys has worked this ground, and every generation has left something of themselves here. Someday it'll be your turn to add to what we've built. The farmhouse sat on a gentle rise, overlooking fields that stretched to the horizon. A 2-story white clapboard structure that Grandpa had maintained with the same meticulous care he applied to everything else. The barn was red with a gambrel roof, large enough to house the equipment and store the grain that came from soil so fertile it seemed to grow whatever you planted with almost supernatural abundance. Grandpa Joe was the kind of man who measured wealth in acres and seasons rather than dollars and cents. He'd wake before dawn every day, even in his 70s, to walk the property lines and check on crops with a devotion that bordered on religious. The land wasn't just his livelihood. It was his identity, his legacy, and his gift to future generations of the family. My father, Michael Kelly, had different ideas about what constituted a meaningful life. He'd left a farm at 18 for college and never looked back, building a successful accounting practice in Chicago and raising his family in suburbs, where the closest thing to agriculture was the organic produce section at Whole Foods. Dad viewed the farm as a financial asset rather than a family heritage, a perspective that created tension during every holiday visit. "It's just dirt, Danny," Dad would say whenever I expressed interest in farming or talked about eventually taking over the property. "You're smart enough to make something of yourself that doesn't involve breaking your back for subsistence wages. Grandpa's stuck in the past, but you don't have to be." The conflict between Dad's urban ambitions and Grandpa's agricultural roots played out over Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings, with me caught in the middle as the only member of my generation who seemed to understand the value of what Grandpa had spent his lifetime building. My cousins, Marcus and Jennifer, were Dad's brother's kids from Denver, and they shared the family's general indifference toward farming. Marcus was studying computer programming, and Jennifer was pursuing a career in marketing. Neither had spent more than a few obligatory summer weeks at the farm, and both seemed to view Grandpa's land as an interesting anachronism, rather than a living legacy. The first sign of serious trouble came during my sophomore year of college, when Grandpa's health began declining more rapidly than anyone had anticipated. What started as occasional forgetfulness progressed to serious memory issues that made it dangerous for him to operate farm equipment or manage complex agricultural decisions. Dad and Uncle Robert began having hushed conversations about, quote, practical arrangements and long-term care options that excluded Grandpa from the decision-making process. When I tried to suggest that I could take a leave of absence from school to help manage the farm, Dad dismissed the idea as impractical and naive. "You're not throwing your education away to play farmer," he said during one particularly heated argument. "Grandpa needs professional care, and the farm needs professional management. This isn't a game or some romantic fantasy about rural life." The decision to move Grandpa to an assisted living facility was made during a family meeting that I wasn't invited to attend. I found out about it when I came home for Thanksgiving break to discover that Grandpa had been relocated to Sunset Manor, a sterile institutional facility 30 miles from the farm he'd called home for over 50 years. Visiting Grandpa in the assisted living facility was heartbreaking in ways I hadn't anticipated. The man who had taught me to read weather patterns and soil conditions was confined to a small room with a single window that looked out on a parking lot. His confusion about where he was and why he couldn't go home was devastating to witness. "Where's my farm, Danny?" he would ask during every visit, his eyes reflecting a lost quality that I'd never seen before. "I need to check on the corn. It's almost harvest time, and I can't remember if I finished combining the North 40. I tried to explain the situation gently, but Grandpa's short-term memory issues meant that every conversation about his relocation felt like breaking the news to him for the first time. The repetitive cycle of confusion and grief was exhausting for everyone involved, but it was particularly painful for me because I understood what the farm had meant to him. The land was being managed by a neighboring farmer who rented the fields for cash crop production, an arrangement that Dad and Uncle Robert had negotiated without consulting me or considering long-term implications for the property's condition. The house and barn were essentially abandoned, with only minimal maintenance to prevent serious deterioration. During my junior year, I started driving out to the property whenever I was home from school, ostensibly to check on the buildings, but really to maintain some connection to the place that had shaped my understanding of family and legacy. The sight of weeds growing in Grandpa's vegetable garden and paint peeling from the barn made me feel like I was watching a piece of family history slowly decay. The conversation that changed everything happened during Christmas break of my senior year, when I overheard Dad and Uncle Robert discussing plans to sell the farm after Grandpa's death. They were comparing market valuations and talking about how to divide the proceeds among family members, treating the transaction like any other real estate deal. "The nursing home costs are eating through his savings faster than we anticipated," Uncle Robert was saying. "We might need to consider selling sooner rather than later, while the agricultural land market is still strong." Dad's response was coldly practical. "I've been saying for years that holding on to the farm was financially irresponsible. The money tied up in that property could be generating real returns if it was properly invested, instead of sitting there growing corn." When I interrupted their conversation to express my opposition to selling the farm, both men looked at me with expressions of polite but firm dismissal. Dad explained that I didn't understand the financial realities involved, while Uncle Robert noted that I was too emotionally attached to make objective decisions about the property. "This isn't your decision to make, Danny," Dad said with finality. "You're not even out of college yet, and you have no experience with property management or agricultural economics. We're trying to do what's best for Grandpa and the whole family, not just preserve some romantic notion about farming." The exclusion from family decision-making about Grandpa's legacy felt like betrayal, but I was powerless to prevent what seemed increasingly inevitable. As a college student with no financial resources and no legal standing regarding the property, I could only watch as plans moved forward to liquidate what I considered the most important asset our family possessed. Grandpa's condition deteriorated rapidly during the spring of my senior year, and he passed away in May, just 2 weeks before my graduation. The funeral was well attended by neighbors and community members who remembered him as a generous and hardworking man, but the service felt incomplete without acknowledgement of his connection to the land that had defined his life. The reading of Grandpa's will revealed that he had left the farm equally to his 2 sons, with provisions that any sale would require unanimous agreement between Dad and Uncle Robert. There was no mention of grandchildren or consideration for my expressed interest in maintaining the property, an oversight that I later learned was due to Dad's influence during the will's preparation. "Grandpa was starting to show signs of confusion when he updated his will," Dad explained after the reading. "We helped him simplify things to avoid complications later on. He understood that we would make decisions that honored his memory, while being practical about the family's needs." Within a month of the funeral, Dad and Uncle Robert had agreed to list the property for sale, citing rising costs for Grandpa's final medical care and the need to distribute assets among family members who had their own financial obligations. The decision was presented as inevitable and responsible, with no discussion of alternatives or consideration for my objections. The real estate listing described the property as 160 acres of prime agricultural land with farm buildings and residents, ideal for cash crop production or rural development. The description reduced Grandpa's lifetime of work to a few lines of marketing copy, stripping away all the history and emotional significance that made the property meaningful. I graduated from college with a degree in agricultural economics and a plan to somehow find the resources to purchase the farm myself. But the asking price of $2.8 million was far beyond anything I could hope to finance as a recent graduate with student loans and no credit history. The farm sat on the market for 6 months without attracting serious offers, partly because of the high asking price and partly because of market conditions that favored larger agricultural operations over family-sized farms. Dad and Uncle Robert became increasingly frustrated with the slow sale process and began considering reducing the price to accelerate the transaction. My first job after graduation was with the USDA's Farm Service Agency, working on loan programs for beginning farmers and agricultural land preservation initiatives. The position paid modestly but provided valuable experience with agricultural finance and land valuation, knowledge that I hoped would eventually help me find a way to acquire Grandpa's farm. The opportunity came from an unexpected source when the real estate agent handling the sale called to inform Dad and Uncle Robert that the property would be going to auction after the listing agreement expired. Agricultural auctions often attracted investors looking for undervalued properties, but they also provided opportunities for serious buyers to acquire land at below-market prices. I spent months preparing for the auction, researching comparable sales, understanding financing options, and developing a strategy that would give me the best chance of success despite my limited resources. The USDA had programs for beginning farmers that could provide favorable financing terms, but qualifying required demonstrating both agricultural experience and financial stability. The agricultural experience requirement was satisfied through documentation of the time I'd spent working with Grandpa and my college coursework in agricultural economics. The financial stability piece was more challenging, requiring creative structuring of employment income, family financial history, and projected agricultural revenue from the property. My application for USDA financing was approved 3 weeks before the auction, providing access to enough capital to make a competitive bid if the property sold within a reasonable range of its appraised value. The approval felt like validation that my plan to preserve Grandpa's legacy was financially viable, not just emotionally motivated. Dad's reaction to learning about my financing approval and auction plans was anger mixed with disbelief. He couldn't understand why I would waste my education and career prospects on what he still viewed as an outdated and economically marginal lifestyle. "You're making a huge mistake, Danny," he said during our final conversation before the auction. "Farming is a dying industry, and you're throwing away opportunities that most people would kill for. Grandpa wouldn't want you to sacrifice your future for some misguided loyalty to a piece of dirt." Uncle Robert's response was more practical but equally discouraging. "Even if you somehow manage to buy the farm, you'll be taking on debt that will consume decades of your life. The agricultural economy is too unpredictable to support that kind of financial risk, especially for someone with no real farming experience." The auction was held on a cold October morning at the county courthouse, with about 30 potential bidders gathered in a room that smelled of coffee and nervous anticipation. Most of the attendees were local farmers looking to expand their operations, agricultural investors seeking rental properties, and a few developers interested in the land's potential for residential subdivision. Dad and Uncle Robert attended the auction, ostensibly to ensure that the sale process went smoothly, but really to witness what they expected would be my financial humiliation when more experienced bidders outpaced my limited resources. The auctioneer's opening description of the property emphasized its agricultural productivity and development potential, highlighting features that I knew by heart from years of walking the fields and working alongside Grandpa. Hearing the land described in purely economic terms felt like listening to someone reduce a family member to a set of statistics. Bidding started at $1.5 million and quickly escalated as several serious buyers demonstrated their interest in acquiring the property. I watched the price climb steadily, waiting for the right moment to enter the competition while monitoring my predetermined maximum bid limit. At $2.2 million, several bidders dropped out, leaving me competing against 2 local farmers and an investment group from Des Moines. The pace of bidding slowed as the price approached the property's appraised value, creating tension in the room as remaining participants calculated their maximum offers. When the bidding reached $2.4 million, one of the farmers withdrew, leaving me in direct competition with the other farmer and the investment group. Each increment required careful consideration of my financing limits and the long-term viability of the debt I would be assuming. The investment group's representative dropped out at $2.55 million, apparently reaching their predetermined limit for the property. The remaining farmer and I continued exchanging bids in $10,000 increments, each increase representing a significant commitment that would affect decades of future financial planning. At $2.68 million, the other farmer shook his head and stepped back from the bidding, leaving me as the high bidder on Grandpa's farm. The auctioneer's call for additional bids was met with silence, and the gavel fell with a finality that felt both triumphant and terrifying. The paperwork following the auction was extensive and complex, requiring coordination between multiple financial institutions, government agencies, and legal representatives. The USDA financing structure included provisions for agricultural education, conservation practices, and beginning farmer support that would help ensure the property's long-term sustainability. Dad's reaction to my successful bid was stunned silence, followed by concerns about the financial burden I had assumed. "You just committed to 30 years of debt payments that will consume every dollar you earn," he said after the auction concluded. "I hope you understand what you've gotten yourself into." Uncle Robert's response was more supportive but equally concerned. "I respect what you're trying to do, Danny, but farming is a tough business even for people with experience and capital. You're starting from scratch with a massive debt load and no safety net." The closing process took 6 weeks, during which I finalized financing arrangements, conducted property inspections, and developed detailed business plans for the farm's operation. The complexity of agricultural lending required documentation of everything from soil quality to crop rotation plans, ensuring that the purchase was economically viable rather than simply emotionally motivated. Moving back to the farm felt like coming home after a long absence, even though the buildings needed significant work and the fields required attention that they hadn't received during the rental period. The house still contained Grandpa's furniture and personal belongings, creating an emotional connection to his presence that made the purchase feel like restoration rather than acquisition. The first year of farming was challenging in ways that college coursework and summer experience hadn't fully prepared me for. Managing crop production, equipment maintenance, marketing decisions, and financial planning required skills that could only be developed through hands-on experience and occasional expensive mistakes. But walking the same fields that Grandpa had farmed for 50 years, using knowledge he had passed down through generations of family farming, felt like honoring his legacy while building something sustainable for the future. The land responded to careful management and conservation practices, producing yields that validated both the agricultural investment and the emotional commitment. Dad's attitude toward my farming venture evolved gradually from skepticism to grudging respect, as the operation demonstrated profitability and long-term viability. His visits to the farm became more frequent and less focused on pointing out potential problems or questioning financial decisions. "I still think you're crazy," he admitted during one harvest season visit, "but you're making it work better than I thought possible. Grandpa would be proud of what you've accomplished here." Uncle Robert became an unexpected source of support, helping with equipment purchases and providing business advice that reflected his own entrepreneurial experience. His children, Marcus and Jennifer, began bringing their families to visit the farm, exposing the next generation to agricultural life that their parents had never experienced. The preservation of Grandpa's farm created opportunities for family connection and education that wouldn't have existed if the property had been sold to outside buyers. Family gatherings moved from restaurants and hotels back to the farmhouse kitchen, where grandchildren could learn about their agricultural heritage while playing in the same barn where their great-grandfather had worked. 5 years after the auction, the farm was not only financially sustainable, but actively contributing to soil conservation, water quality improvement, and local economic development through partnerships with neighboring operations and community-supported agriculture programs. The success felt like vindication of Grandpa's belief that the land had value beyond its market price, that careful stewardship could create benefits for both the environment and the community that couldn't be measured in purely economic terms. Looking back on the family conflict and financial risk that had made the purchase possible, I realized that buying back Grandpa's farm had been about more than preserving property or proving a point about agricultural viability. It had been about maintaining connections between generations, honoring the work and values of people who had built something meaningful, and ensuring that those contributions wouldn't be lost to short-term financial considerations. The family that had sold the land without including me in the decision had ultimately learned that some things couldn't be reduced to market transactions, that legacy and heritage had value that couldn't be calculated in spreadsheets or realized through stock portfolios. Grandpa's farm was back in Kelly hands, worked by someone who understood its history and committed to its future, producing food and building community in ways that honored the past while embracing the future. They had sold my grandfather's land without me, treating it like any other real estate transaction. But I had bought it back at auction, not just as property but as family legacy, proving that some things are too important to be left to market forces and financial calculations. The black Iowa soil still ran through my fingers the way Grandpa had taught me, and it still carried the blood and sweat of 4 generations of Kellys who had understood that wealth measured in acres and seasons was the only kind that truly lasted. The first winter back on the farm nearly broke me, both financially and emotionally. The heating bills for the old farmhouse were astronomical, the ancient furnace requiring constant repairs that ate into my carefully calculated budget. Pipes froze twice despite my best efforts at insulation, flooding the basement and requiring emergency plumbing services that cost more than I'd budgeted for equipment maintenance for the entire season. But the real challenge wasn't the money, it was the isolation. After 4 years of college surrounded by people my age, living alone in a house that felt enormous and empty was psychologically devastating. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the wind-rattling windows and the occasional creak of settling timber that had been expanding and contracting with Iowa seasons for over a century. I found myself talking to Grandpa's photograph in the living room, updating him on crop prices and weather patterns the way I'd done when he was alive. The one-sided conversations helped maintain my sanity during the longest nights, but they also highlighted how completely I'd separated myself from the social connections that most people my age took for granted. The neighboring farmers were polite, but distant, treating me with the kind of cautious respect reserved for outsiders who might or might not prove themselves worthy of acceptance. At 22, I was easily the youngest farm operator in the county, and my college education marked me as potentially arrogant or impractical in the eyes of men who had learned agriculture through decades of hands-on experience. Tom Hendricks, whose property bordered mine to the east, was the first neighbor to offer genuine assistance rather than polite small talk. He was in his 50s, a third-generation farmer who had watched his own son leave for the city and never return. Tom's wife had died 3 years earlier, leaving him to manage both his farm and his loneliness, with the same stoic determination that characterized most rural widowers. "Your grandfather was a good man," Tom told me during my first spring, when equipment failures had left me struggling to get corn planted on schedule. "He helped me out more times than I could count, never asking for anything in return. If you're half the farmer he was, you'll do fine. If you're not, well, this land will teach you what you need to know, or it'll break you trying." Tom's offer to help with planting came with the implicit understanding that I would reciprocate during his harvest season, creating the kind of informal cooperation network that had sustained rural communities for generations. Working alongside him and his crew taught me practical skills that couldn't be learned from textbooks, while also providing social connection that made the isolation more bearable. The second year brought its own challenges when a late spring freeze wiped out 30% of my corn crop, creating a financial shortfall that forced me to take out an operating loan to cover basic expenses. The loan officer at the rural bank, Janet Morrison, was sympathetic but realistic about the risks involved in agricultural lending to beginning farmers. "Farming isn't just about knowing how to grow crops," she explained while reviewing my loan application. "It's about managing risk, adapting to circumstances you can't control, and having enough financial cushion to survive the bad years that come along every decade or so. Your grandfather understood that, which is why he was able to keep this place profitable for 50 years. The operating loan was approved, but Janet's warnings about agricultural volatility proved prescient when grain prices collapsed during my third year due to oversupply and trade disputes that reduced export demand. The income from my crop sales barely covered operating expenses, let alone debt service on the land purchase, forcing me to take a part-time job with the county extension office to supplement farm income. Working for the extension office provided additional agricultural education while generating steady income that helped stabilize my financial situation. The position involved conducting soil tests, advising farmers about conservation practices, and helping coordinate government programs that supported sustainable agriculture. The work was meaningful and directly related to my farming operation, but it also meant spending less time on my own property. Dad's visits during this period were marked by barely concealed satisfaction at my financial struggles, though he was careful not to express, "I told you so," too directly. His comments about the challenges of agricultural economics were technically supportive, but they carried undertones that suggested he was waiting for me to admit that farming had been a mistake. "I know you're committed to making this work," he said during one particularly difficult conversation about my debt-to-income ratio. But there's no shame in recognizing when something isn't financially viable. You could sell the farm for more than you paid and start over with a clean slate, maybe pursue agricultural policy work in Washington, where your education would be more appreciated. Uncle Robert's approach was more encouraging, though he also expressed concerns about the long-term sustainability of my operation. His visits often included offers to provide additional financial support, which I appreciated but couldn't accept without compromising my independence, and proving his brother's point about the impracticality of my choices. "I admire what you're trying to do," Robert told me during a particularly honest conversation about my financial situation. "But pride isn't worth destroying your future over. Family is supposed to help family, and there's no shame in accepting assistance when you're working towards something meaningful." The turning point came during my 4th year, when I began developing relationships with local restaurants and farmers markets that were interested in purchasing directly from small-scale producers. The farm-to-table movement was gaining momentum in nearby cities, creating demand for locally grown products that could command premium prices compared to commodity crops. Transitioning part of my operation from corn and soybeans to diversified vegetable production required significant changes in equipment, infrastructure, and marketing strategies. The initial investment was substantial, but the potential returns were much higher than traditional commodity agriculture, and the work was more personally satisfying than growing crops for anonymous grain elevators. The first farmers market season was both exhilarating and exhausting, requiring me to wake at 4 a.m. to harvest, wash, and package vegetables before driving to Des Moines for weekend markets that started at dawn. The direct interaction with customers who appreciated knowing where their food came from was rewarding in ways that selling commodity grain had never been. Emma Watkins was a regular customer who arrived early every Saturday to purchase vegetables for the cafe she managed in downtown Des Moines. She was intelligent, environmentally conscious, and genuinely interested in sustainable agriculture practices, qualities that made our weekly conversations about farming and food systems increasingly meaningful. Emma's background was urban professional development, but she had grown up in a small town and retained appreciation for rural life that many city residents lacked. Her questions about farming practices were informed and thoughtful, demonstrating understanding of the challenges involved in producing food sustainably while maintaining economic viability. Our relationship developed gradually from professional interactions to personal friendship, and eventually to romantic involvement that was complicated by the geographic distance between the farm and her urban lifestyle. Emma's willingness to spend weekends helping with farm work and learning about agricultural production suggested that she might be open to more rural living arrangements. The decision to ask Emma to move to the farm was one of the most significant risks I'd taken since purchasing the property. Her career in Des Moines was successful and fulfilling, and asking her to give up urban amenities for rural isolation was presumptuous. But the relationship had reached a point where geographic compromise was necessary for continued growth. Emma's response was characteristically thoughtful and practical. She was interested in rural living but needed to maintain her career, which would require either commuting to Des Moines or developing remote work arrangements that would allow her to contribute to the cafe's operations from the farm. The solution we developed involved Emma transitioning to a consulting role with her cafe, while establishing a catering business that specialized in farm-to-table events, using ingredients from my operation and other local producers. The business model created synergy between our respective skills while allowing both of us to pursue work that we found meaningful. Emma's presence on the farm transformed both the operation and my personal life in ways that I hadn't anticipated. Her event planning experience helped develop agritourism opportunities that generated additional income, while educating urban visitors about agricultural production. Her business management skills improved the efficiency of farm operations, while reducing the isolation that had been such a challenge during my first years. The catering business grew rapidly as demand for locally sourced events increased among environmental conscious consumers and businesses. Emma's reputation for quality food and creative presentation attracted clients who were willing to pay premium prices for unique experiences that connected them with agricultural production. The success of our combined operations attracted attention from agricultural development organizations and media outlets that were interested in innovative approaches to small farm sustainability. The recognition led to speaking opportunities and consulting work that supplemented farm income while raising awareness about the viability of diversified agricultural operations. Dad's attitude toward my farming venture began to shift as the operation demonstrated consistent profitability and growth potential. His visits became more frequent and less focused on pointing out financial risks or questioning business decisions. Emma's presence seemed to reassure him that I had found a life partner who understood business fundamentals and wouldn't allow romantic attachment to farming to override practical considerations. "I still think farming is too risky for someone with your education," he admitted during one visit when the catering business was booking events months in advance. "But you and Emma have built something that's obviously working. Grandpa would be proud of what you've accomplished, even if the operation looks nothing like what he had in mind." Uncle Robert became increasingly supportive as the farm's success became undeniable, often bringing friends and business associates for tours that showcased both agricultural production and the event catering operation. His pride in the family's agricultural heritage had been rekindled by witnessing a successful transition to modern farming practices. Marcus and Jennifer, my cousins who had shown little interest in the farm during childhood, began visiting more frequently with their own families. Their children were fascinated by farm animals, crop production, and the wide-open spaces that were completely different from their urban environments. Jennifer's 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, was particularly interested in everything about farming, asking detailed questions about plant growth, animal care, and environmental conservation that reminded me of my own childhood curiosity about Grandpa's operation. Her enthusiasm suggested that interest in agricultural life might skip generations, but wasn't entirely lost from the family. The most significant expansion of our operation came during the 5th year, when Emma and I decided to add value-added food processing to our business model. The commercial kitchen we built in a renovated barn allowed us to produce preserves, pickled vegetables, and prepared foods that could be sold year-round rather than just during growing season. The processing operation required additional licensing, equipment, and staff, representing the largest investment we'd made since purchasing the farm. But the potential for year-round income and product differentiation made the expansion financially attractive while providing employment opportunities for local residents. Sarah Chen, a recent culinary school graduate who had been working for Emma's catering business, became our head processor and product development specialist. Her creativity with flavor combinations and packaging design helped establish our brand in specialty food stores throughout the region. The food processing business attracted attention from distributors who were interested in carrying our products in larger retail chains, creating opportunities for significant scaling that would require additional investment and operational changes. The growth potential was exciting but also concerning, as rapid expansion could compromise the quality and local character that had made our products successful. Emma and I spent months debating whether to pursue wholesale distribution opportunities or maintain focus on direct sales and local markets that provided higher profit margins and stronger customer relationships. The decision required careful consideration of our personal values and long-term goals for the operation. We ultimately chose to expand gradually, maintaining emphasis on quality and local connection, while selectively adding wholesale accounts that aligned with our values and operational capacity. The approach required turning down some potentially lucrative opportunities, but it preserved the characteristics that made our business unique and sustainable. The 6th year brought unexpected challenges when a severe drought reduced crop yields throughout the region, testing the resilience of our diversified operation and the strength of customer relationships we'd built over several years. The vegetable crops that formed the foundation of our direct sales and catering business were particularly affected by the lack of rainfall. The drought also created opportunities to demonstrate the value of sustainable farming practices, as our soil conservation and water management systems performed better than conventional operations during the extreme weather conditions. The organic matter that we'd been building in the soil for years helped retain moisture and support plant growth even during periods of limited precipitation. Emma's catering business adapted to the drought conditions by sourcing more products from other regional producers while maintaining emphasis on locally grown ingredients whenever possible. Her relationships with customers were strong enough that they understood and supported adjustments to menus based on agricultural realities. The food processing operation helped offset reduced fresh vegetable sales by utilizing the smaller harvest more efficiently and creating shelf-stable products that captured value from crops that might otherwise have been lost to drought stress. Recovery from the drought year strengthened our operation by forcing innovation and efficiency improvements that wouldn't have been necessary under normal conditions. The experience also reinforced the importance of diversification and financial reserves for managing agricultural risks that were beyond our control. The 7th year marked a milestone when we achieved enough financial stability to begin repaying the USDA loan ahead of schedule, reducing debt service costs, and providing additional working capital for continued expansion and improvement. The early loan payments were symbolic as well as financial, representing the success of our commitment to sustainable agriculture and rural economic development. Emma and I also got married that year, holding the ceremony on the farm with guests who included farmers, chefs, agricultural professionals, and family members who had watched our relationship and business develop over several years. The wedding was catered using ingredients from our own operation and those of neighboring producers, creating a celebration that reflected our values and community connections. Grandpa's farmhouse was renovated for the wedding, with updates that preserved its historical character while improving functionality and energy efficiency. The improvements were funded by the business success and made the house more comfortable for year-round living, while maintaining its connection to the property's agricultural heritage. The wedding also provided an opportunity for extended family reconciliation, as Dad and Uncle Robert both participated enthusiastically in the celebration and expressed genuine pride in what Emma and I had accomplished together. The farm had become a place for family gatherings rather than a source of conflict about financial decisions and career choices. Marcus's son, now 10 years old, spent most of the wedding weekend exploring the farm and asking questions about crops, animals, and equipment that suggested genuine interest in agricultural life. His enthusiasm reminded me of my own childhood fascination with farming, and raised questions about whether the next generation might maintain family connections to the land. The 8th year brought Emma's pregnancy and the prospect of raising the next generation of the family on land that had been home to Kellis for over a century. The anticipation of parenthood added new dimensions to our farming operation, as we considered how to create an environment that would be both safe for children and educationally enriching. The farm's educational value became more apparent as we began planning for our child's upbringing in an environment where food production, environmental stewardship, and seasonal rhythms would be part of daily life. The lessons that Grandpa had taught me about reading the land and understanding agricultural cycles would be passed down to another generation. Emma's pregnancy also motivated additional safety improvements throughout the operation, including equipment modifications, building updates, and process changes that would reduce risks while maintaining operational efficiency. The modifications were expensive but necessary for creating a family-friendly farm environment. Our daughter, Catherine Kelly Murphy, named for both Emma's grandmother and Grandpa's mother, was born in late spring during planting season, adding joy and complexity to an already demanding time of year. Balancing infant care with agricultural deadlines required careful planning and additional help from family and neighbors. Tom Hendricks, who had become like a surrogate father to me over the years, was particularly helpful during Catherine's first months, providing practical assistance with farm work while also sharing stories about raising his own children on a farm decades earlier. "Children and farming go together naturally," he told Emma while she nursed Catherine in the farmhouse kitchen after a long day of planting. "Kids who grow up understanding where food comes from and how much work it takes to produce it develop appreciation for things that city children never learn." Catherine's presence on the farm attracted additional attention from customers and media who were interested in stories about young families choosing agricultural lifestyles despite the challenges and uncertainties involved. The human interest aspect helped market our products while also raising awareness about the viability of modern family farming. The 9th year focused on developing educational programs that would allow other families to experience farm life through day camps, workshops, and overnight stays that combined recreation with agricultural education. Emma's event planning skills were essential for creating programming that was both fun and informative for participants of varying ages and backgrounds. The agritourism programs generated significant additional income while fulfilling our goal of educating urban residents about food production and environmental stewardship. Children who participated in farm camps often returned with their families for weekend visits, creating ongoing relationships that supported both business development and community building. Educational programming also provided opportunities to share Grandpa's philosophy about land stewardship and family farming with people who had never considered the importance of agricultural heritage and rural communities. The programs became a way of honoring his memory while adapting his values to contemporary circumstances. Dad, who had initially been skeptical about the viability of farming as a career choice, became one of our most enthusiastic supporters and frequent volunteers for educational programs. His accounting background proved valuable for managing the financial complexity of our diversified operation, and his urban perspective helped bridge communication gaps between farm and city participants. "I was wrong about farming being obsolete," he admitted during one of our family dinners in the farmhouse kitchen where Grandpa had shared meals for 50 years. "What you and Emma have built here is exactly the kind of innovative business that can succeed in any economy. Grandpa would be amazed by how you've adapted his basic principles to modern markets." The 10th year brought recognition from agricultural organizations and rural development agencies that cited our operation as a model for successful small farm sustainability and rural economic development. The awards and media attention were gratifying but also overwhelming, as we tried to balance public recognition with the practical demands of farming and family life. Catherine, now 2 years old, was walking through the same fields where I had learned to identify plants and understand seasonal cycles. Her fascination with animals, tractors, and growing vegetables suggested that she might develop the same appreciation for agricultural life that had shaped my own childhood and career choices. Emma's pregnancy with our second child added new excitement and challenges to an operation that was approaching the limits of what we could manage without additional staff and infrastructure. The expansion decisions we made during this period would determine whether our farm remained a family operation or evolved into a larger business with employees and more complex management requirements. The decision to hire full-time employees was difficult because it meant giving up some of the intimate scale that had characterized our operation. But it was necessary for continued growth and for reducing the physical demands on Emma during pregnancy and early parenthood. James Rodriguez, a recent agricultural college graduate with interests in sustainable farming and food systems, became our first full-time employee. His enthusiasm and education provided additional capacity, while his fresh perspective contributed to innovation and efficiency improvements throughout the operation. Our son, Joseph Kelly Murphy, named for Grandpa, was born during harvest season, continuing the family tradition of children arriving during the busiest times of the agricultural year. The timing was challenging but also symbolically appropriate, as Joe's birth coincided with the culmination of another successful growing season. The 11th year marked a decade since I had purchased the farm at auction, providing an opportunity to reflect on the transformation that had occurred both in the operation and in family relationships that had been strained by the original sale decision. The farm was now generating more than triple the income that Grandpa had ever achieved, while employing several local residents and contributing to rural economic development in ways that traditional commodity agriculture couldn't match. The success validated both his belief in the land's potential and my commitment to honoring his legacy through innovation and adaptation. Emma and I had built not just a successful business, but a model for how agricultural operations could adapt to changing markets while maintaining connection to family heritage and community values. The farm had become a destination for people seeking to understand food production and rural life, creating bridges between urban and rural communities that had been separated by decades of economic and cultural change. The most meaningful recognition came during a community celebration of the farm's success, when Tom Hendricks presented us with a plaque that included soil from every farm in the county. "This represents what your grandfather always believed," he said during the presentation, "that good farming isn't just about individual success, but about building community and taking care of the land for future generations." Dad and Uncle Robert, who had once viewed the farm as an outdated financial burden, now brought business associates and friends for tours that showcased both agricultural innovation and family heritage preservation. Their pride in what had been accomplished was genuine and deeply satisfying after years of skepticism and concern. Marcus and Jennifer had become regular visitors with their families, and their children spent weeks each summer learning about farming and rural life in ways that connected them to family history they had never experienced. The farm had become a gathering place for extended family celebrations and a source of identity that transcended individual career choices and lifestyle preferences. Catherine and Joe were growing up surrounded by the same black Iowa soil that had shaped 5 generations of Kellys, learning lessons about work, responsibility, and environmental stewardship that would influence their character regardless of the career paths they eventually chose. The 12th year brought opportunities to expand our model to other properties and communities, as agricultural development organizations sought to replicate our success in regions where family farms were struggling to remain viable. Emma and I had become inadvertent experts in agricultural transition and rural economic development. The consulting work provided additional income while allowing us to share knowledge and experience with other families facing similar challenges about land preservation, business innovation, and generational transition. The work was meaningful but time-consuming, requiring careful balance with our own operation and family commitments. Our most significant expansion came when the neighboring farm became available for purchase after Tom Hendricks decided to retire. The additional acreage would allow us to increase production while providing space for larger educational programs and event hosting. The decision to purchase Tom's property was emotionally and financially significant, as it represented both an opportunity for growth and a responsibility to preserve another piece of agricultural heritage. Tom's willingness to sell to us rather than to larger agricultural operations reflected his confidence in our stewardship and his desire to see the land remain connected to family farming. The acquisition was financed through a combination of business profits, land appreciation, and agricultural development loans that recognized our track record of successful innovation and expansion. The financial structure was complex but manageable given our established profitability and diversified income streams. Combining the two properties created opportunities for improved efficiency and expanded programming while maintaining the family-scale character that had made our operation successful. Tom remained on the expanded farm as a consultant and mentor, providing continuity with the land's history while supporting continued innovation. The 13th year focused on integrating the additional property while maintaining quality and personal connection that had characterized our business model. The expansion required additional staff, equipment, and infrastructure, but it also provided economies of scale that improved profitability and sustainability. Catherine, now 4 years old, was beginning to understand the farm as her home and heritage, in ways that reminded me of my own childhood relationship with Grandpa and the land. Her questions about why we grew different crops and how we cared for animals demonstrated developing appreciation for the complexity and responsibility involved in agricultural stewardship. Joe, at 2 years old, was fascinated by tractors and farm equipment, with the same enthusiasm that had characterized my own early relationship with farming. His fearless exploration of the farm, always under careful supervision, suggested that he might develop the confidence and curiosity necessary for agricultural life. Emma's leadership of the educational and agritourism programs had evolved to include partnerships with schools, youth organizations, and environmental groups that brought hundreds of children to the farm each year for hands-on learning about food production and environmental stewardship. The educational impact extended beyond individual participants to their families and communities, creating ripple effects that raised awareness about sustainable agriculture and the importance of supporting local food systems. The programs had become a significant source of income while fulfilling our commitment to agricultural education and community service. The 14th year brought recognition from state and national organizations that cited our operation as a model for successful agricultural transition and rural economic development. The awards included financial grants that supported expansion of educational programming and infrastructure improvements. The recognition also brought speaking opportunities and consulting requests from around the country, as other communities sought to understand how family farms could remain viable in contemporary economic conditions. The demand for our expertise was gratifying but also overwhelming, requiring careful management to avoid compromising our own operation. Emma and I decided to establish a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting agricultural transition and family farm preservation, creating a structure that would allow us to share knowledge and experience while maintaining focus on our own farm and family. The nonprofit would provide a vehicle for grant funding and educational programming that extended beyond our individual operation. The Kelly Family Farm Foundation was established during the 15th year with a mission to support beginning farmers, preserve agricultural heritage, and educate communities about sustainable food production. The foundation provided a legacy structure that would continue our work regardless of changes in our personal circumstances. Catherine and Joe were now old enough to participate meaningfully in farm work, learning the same lessons about responsibility, seasonal cycles, and environmental stewardship that had shaped my own character. Their enthusiasm for farm life was genuine, but not assumed, as Emma and I were committed to supporting whatever interests and career choices they eventually developed. The Foundation's first major project was establishing a beginning farmer incubator program that provided land access, mentorship, and business support for young people interested in agricultural careers. The program addressed barriers that had nearly prevented my own farming success while creating opportunities for the next generation of agricultural entrepreneurs. Looking back on 15 years of farm ownership and business development, the transformation from a struggling young farmer to a successful agricultural entrepreneur felt almost miraculous. The property that Dad and Uncle Robert had viewed as a financial burden had become the foundation for a thriving enterprise that employed local residents, educated urban visitors, and preserved agricultural heritage for future generations. The success had been achieved through innovation and adaptation rather than simply preserving traditional farming practices, demonstrating that agricultural heritage could be honored while embracing contemporary opportunities and challenges. Grandpa's values of hard work, environmental stewardship, and community service had been maintained, while business models and production methods evolved to meet changing market conditions. The family relationships that had been strained by the original sale decision had been transformed through demonstrated success and shared pride in what had been accomplished. Dad and Uncle Robert, who had once viewed farming as outdated and financially risky, now served on the Foundation's board and actively supported agricultural education and rural economic development. Marcus and Jennifer's children were spending entire summers on the farm, learning about their agricultural heritage, while developing appreciation for rural life and environmental stewardship. The farm had become a source of family identity and connection that transcended individual career choices and geographic locations. The most meaningful validation came from community recognition and the knowledge that our work was contributing to rural economic development and agricultural education in ways that extended far beyond our individual operation. The farm had become a model and inspiration for other families facing similar challenges about land preservation and business innovation. Catherine and Joe were growing up with advantages and opportunities that I had never imagined when purchasing the farm as a young adult struggling with debt and isolation. They would inherit not just land, but a thriving business, strong community connections, and a legacy of innovation and service that would provide foundation for whatever futures they chose to build. The black Iowa soil still ran through my fingers the way Grandpa had taught me, carrying the accumulated wisdom of generations of careful stewardship and environmental protection, but now it also carried the promise of continued innovation and adaptation, ensuring that the land would remain productive and meaningful for whatever challenges and opportunities the future might bring. They had sold my grandfather's land without me, treating it as just another real estate transaction to be optimized for financial return. But I had bought it back at auction and transformed it into something far more valuable than they had ever imagined, proving that some legacies are too important to be left to market forces and financial calculations. The farm was no longer just land. It was a living demonstration that agricultural heritage could thrive in contemporary conditions when supported by innovation, community engagement, and unwavering commitment to stewardship and service. The 20th anniversary of purchasing the farm back at auction coincided with Catherine's 10th birthday and a milestone that I had never dared to imagine during those early years of financial struggle. The farm was now completely debt-free. The final payment on the USDA loan had been made 2 years ahead of schedule, using profits from the Foundation's consulting work and the continued growth of our diversified agricultural operation. Catherine's birthday party was held in the same barn where Emma and I had been married, now expanded and updated to accommodate the educational programs that brought hundreds of visitors to the farm each year. The guest list reflected the community that had grown around our operation: neighboring farmers, restaurant partners from Des Moines, Foundation board members, and 3 generations of the Kelly family. Watching Catherine confidently lead tours for her school friends, explaining crop rotation and sustainable farming practices with the casual expertise of someone who had grown up surrounded by agriculture, I was struck by how naturally she had absorbed lessons that had taken me years to learn. "She has your grandfather's gift for reading the land," Tom Hendricks observed as Catherine demonstrated how to test soil moisture by touch, her small hands working the black earth with instinctive understanding. But she also has her mother's head for business. That's a powerful combination for whatever she decides to do with her life. Jo, now 7, was more interested in the mechanical aspects of farming, spending hours with our equipment manager James Rodriguez learning about tractor maintenance and precision agriculture technology. His fascination with how things worked reminded me of my own childhood curiosity, though his interests extended to GPS guidance systems and drone technology that hadn't existed during Grandpa's era. The farm's success had attracted attention from agricultural technology companies who wanted to test new equipment and practices on our operation. The partnerships provided access to cutting-edge innovations while generating additional income through research collaborations and equipment demonstrations. One particularly exciting development was a partnership with Iowa State University's Agricultural Engineering Department to test autonomous farming equipment that could reduce labor costs while improving precision and efficiency. The project aligned with our commitment to innovation while providing educational opportunities for students and researchers. Emma's role had evolved to focus primarily on the Foundation's work and regional agricultural policy advocacy, while I managed day-to-day farm operations with our expanded staff. The division of responsibilities allowed us to pursue different aspects of agricultural development, while maintaining our partnership in both business and family life. The Foundation's Beginning Farmer program had graduated 15 young agricultural entrepreneurs over 5 years, with 12 still actively farming and contributing to rural economic development throughout the Midwest. The success rate was remarkable compared to national statistics for beginning farmers, validating our approach to mentorship and business support. One graduate, Maria Santos, had purchased farmland just 20 miles away and was specializing in organic vegetable production for urban farmers markets. Her success story was particularly meaningful because she was the first person of color to participate in our program, breaking barriers in a region where agricultural ownership had historically been dominated by white families. Maria's achievements had inspired the Foundation to develop targeted outreach programs for underrepresented groups in agriculture, addressing systemic barriers that had limited diversity in farm ownership and agricultural leadership. The work was challenging but necessary for creating a more inclusive and equitable food system. The Foundation's advocacy efforts had also contributed to state legislation that provided tax incentives for farmland preservation and agricultural education programs. The policy changes created financial benefits for our operation while supporting similar initiatives throughout Iowa and neighboring states. Dad's transformation from farming skeptic to agricultural advocate was complete by the 20th anniversary, as he had become one of the Foundation's most effective fundraisers and policy advocates. His business connections and financial expertise proved valuable for developing partnerships with urban corporations that wanted to support sustainable agriculture initiatives. "I spent 20 years telling you that farming was a dead-end career," he admitted during his speech at the anniversary celebration. "I was wrong about almost everything. You didn't just save Grandpa's farm. You showed how agriculture could be a force for economic development and community building. I'm proud of what you've accomplished, and I'm grateful that you didn't listen to my advice." Uncle Robert had also become deeply involved in the Foundation's work, contributing both financial support and business expertise that enhanced our organizational effectiveness. His children, Marcus and Jennifer, served on the Foundation's advisory board and brought their own professional skills to support agricultural education and rural development initiatives. Marcus's teenage son, David, had spent 3 consecutive summers working on the farm and was seriously considering agricultural studies for college. His interest represented the potential for family farming traditions to skip generations before re-emerging in new forms adapted to contemporary conditions. Jennifer's daughter, Sophie, now 16, had developed a passion for agricultural policy and environmental advocacy that might lead to a career in agricultural law or environmental protection. Her sophisticated understanding of food systems and sustainability issues impressed Foundation board members and visiting researchers. The most significant expansion of our operation came during the 21st year, when we were offered the opportunity to purchase an additional 320 acres from a retiring farmer whose children had no interest in continuing agricultural production. The property included valuable wetlands and prairie restoration areas that would enhance our environmental conservation programs. The acquisition required careful financial planning and environmental assessment, as the property came with conservation easements that limited development but provided tax benefits and aligned with our commitment to environmental stewardship. The purchase would nearly double our operational size while adding significant educational and research opportunities. Emma and I spent months evaluating the expansion opportunity, considering both the potential benefits and the risks involved in managing a much larger operation. The decision would affect our family life, business model, and long-term goals for the Foundation's work. The environmental assessment revealed that the additional property included rare prairie plants and wildlife habitat that had been preserved through decades of careful management by the previous owner. The ecological value added another dimension to our stewardship responsibilities while providing opportunities for research partnerships with conservation organizations. We ultimately decided to purchase the property through an innovative financing structure that involved the Foundation, several conservation organizations, and a group of impact investors who were interested in supporting sustainable agriculture and environmental preservation. The arrangement ensured that the land would remain permanently protected while providing resources for continued agricultural production and educational programming. The expanded operation required hiring additional staff and developing new management systems that could coordinate activities across nearly 500 acres of diverse agricultural and conservation land. The organizational challenges were significant but manageable given our experience with growth and adaptation over the previous 2 decades. Catherine, now 11, was old enough to understand the significance of the expansion and actively participated in planning for educational programs that would utilize the additional land. Her ideas for youth conservation camps and prairie restoration projects demonstrated sophisticated thinking about environmental education and community engagement. Joe's interests had evolved to include precision agriculture and environmental monitoring, fields that combined his mechanical aptitude with growing awareness of environmental challenges. His enthusiasm for drone technology and GPS-guided equipment suggested potential career paths that would blend traditional farming with cutting-edge technology. The expanded operation attracted national attention from agricultural and environmental organizations that recognized our integrated approach to production, conservation, and education. The recognition led to speaking opportunities and consulting requests from around the country and internationally. One particularly meaningful invitation came from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which requested a presentation about our model for sustainable small farm development at their annual conference on rural economic policy. The international platform provided opportunities to share our experience with policymakers and agricultural leaders from around the world. The preparation for international presentations required documenting our practices and outcomes in ways that could be understood and adapted by different cultures and economic systems. The process helped us better understand what we had accomplished while identifying lessons that might benefit other rural communities. Emma's presentation at the OECD conference focused on the role of women in agricultural entrepreneurship and rural economic development, drawing on her own experience building businesses that bridged urban and rural markets. Her insights about gender equity in agriculture resonated with international audiences seeking to address similar challenges in their own countries. The international recognition led to partnerships with agricultural development organizations working in developing countries that were interested in adapting our educational and business development models to different cultural and economic contexts. The work provided new perspectives on food security and rural development while expanding our understanding of global agricultural challenges. One particularly rewarding partnership involved working with rural communities in Guatemala to develop small-scale food processing enterprises that could add value to agricultural production, while creating employment opportunities for young people who might otherwise migrate to urban areas or other countries. The international work required careful cultural adaptation and collaboration with local organizations that understood regional needs and opportunities. Our role was to share technical knowledge and business development experience, while learning from local expertise about farming practices and community organization. The Foundation's 25th year brought recognition as a national model for agricultural education and rural economic development, with federal funding to expand our beginning farmer programs to other states. The expansion required developing training materials and organizational systems that could be implemented by partner organizations across the Midwest. Catherine, now 15, had developed sophisticated understanding of agricultural policy and environmental science that impressed college admissions counselors and suggested potential for leadership in agricultural research or policy development. Her summer internship with the State Department of Agriculture provided exposure to policy-making processes and career opportunities in agricultural government service. Joe, at 12, was building and programming agricultural monitoring devices with skills that surpassed many college students in engineering programs. His innovations in automated irrigation and crop monitoring systems were being tested by other farms in our network, demonstrating practical applications for his technical interests. The children's developing expertise and interests raised questions about generational transition and the future leadership of our operation and foundation. Emma and I were committed to supporting whatever career paths they chose, while ensuring that the farm and foundation could continue their work regardless of family involvement. The transition planning process involved developing organizational structures that could operate independently of family leadership while maintaining the values and mission that had guided our work for 25 years. The planning required difficult conversations about legacy, control, and the long-term sustainability of institutions built around family vision and leadership. One key decision was establishing a community land trust that would ensure permanent agricultural use and affordable access for beginning farmers, regardless of family ownership changes. The trust structure provided security for long-term conservation while creating opportunities for the next generation of farmers to access land that would otherwise be unaffordable. The 30th anniversary of purchasing the farm provided an opportunity to reflect on 3 decades of agricultural innovation, family growth, and community development that had transformed not just our operation but the broader understanding of how family farms could remain viable in contemporary economic conditions. The celebration was attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by our work: foundation program graduates who had become successful farmers, students who had participated in educational programs, policymakers who had been influenced by our advocacy efforts, and family members who had watched the farm evolve from a struggling operation to a thriving enterprise. Catherine, now 20 and completing her degree in agricultural economics at Iowa State, delivered a presentation about the farm's role in her own development and her vision for the future of agriculture. Her confidence and expertise reflected years of hands-on learning combined with formal education that prepared her for leadership in whatever field she chose to pursue. "This farm taught me that agriculture isn't just about producing food," she said during her presentation. "It's about stewardship, community building, and creating opportunities for the next generation to build on what previous generations have accomplished. Whether I spend my career farming, working in agricultural policy, or doing something completely different, the lessons I learned here will guide my choices and values." Joe, now 17 and preparing for college engineering programs, had developed agricultural technology innovations that were being commercialized through partnerships with equipment manufacturers. His work on autonomous monitoring systems and precision application technology demonstrated how traditional farming knowledge could be enhanced through engineering innovation. The most meaningful recognition came from the community itself, as the county commissioners designated our farm as a historic landmark that represented the evolution of Midwestern agriculture and the preservation of family farming traditions through innovation and adaptation. The landmark designation acknowledged not just our individual achievements, but the broader significance of demonstrating that agricultural heritage could thrive when supported by community engagement, environmental stewardship, and commitment to education and service. Emma and I had built more than a successful farm. We had created a model for how rural communities could adapt to changing economic conditions while preserving the values and relationships that made agricultural life meaningful and sustainable. The farm that had once been sold without including me in the decision had become a center for agricultural innovation and education that influenced policy and practice throughout the region and beyond. The transformation proved that some legacies are too important to be left to market forces, and that determined individuals can create positive change that extends far beyond their own circumstances. Looking toward the future, with Catherine and Joe preparing to make their own choices about career and service, I felt confident that the foundation we had built would continue growing and adapting to meet new challenges and opportunities in agriculture and rural development. The black Iowa soil still ran through my fingers the way Grandpa had taught me, but but now it also carried the promise of continued innovation and service that would benefit generations of farmers and communities yet to come. The land that had been in Kelly hands for over a century would remain productive and meaningful, regardless of who ultimately inherited the responsibility for its stewardship. They had sold my grandfather's land without me, but I had bought it back and transformed it into something far more valuable than they had ever imagined. The farm was no longer just property. It was a living legacy of agricultural innovation, family heritage, and community service that would continue long after any individual contribution had ended. The boy who had learned to read the land from his grandfather had grown into a man who taught others to see agriculture as a force for positive change in the world. The farm that had almost been lost to financial calculation had become a model for how agricultural heritage could thrive in contemporary conditions when supported by vision, determination, and unwavering commitment to stewardship and service. Grandpa Joe would have been amazed by what had grown from the lessons he taught about respect for the land and responsibility to community. His simple belief that this dirt has our blood in it had evolved into a comprehensive understanding of how agricultural stewardship could create benefits that extended far beyond individual farms to influence entire communities and regions. The farm was home, but it was also much more. It was proof that legacy isn't just about preserving the past, but about adapting inherited values to create new opportunities for service and growth. The land would continue feeding people and building community long after the current generation had returned to the soil that had sustained and inspired their work. The call that would reshape everything came on a crisp October morning during harvest season of the farm's 32nd year. Catherine, now 22 and working as a policy analyst for the USDA, while completing her master's degree in agricultural economics, had been selected for a prestigious fellowship with the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome. The opportunity represented everything I had hoped education could provide for her broader perspective, international experience, and the chance to influence global food policy in ways that could benefit millions of people. But it also meant that she would be absent during the critical period when succession planning for the farm and foundation needed to be finalized. "I want to take the fellowship, Dad," Catherine said during our conversation about her decision, "but I also want you to know that I'm committed to continuing what we've built here. This experience in Rome will give me knowledge and connections that could help the foundation work more effectively on international agricultural development." Joe, now 19 and studying agricultural engineering at Iowa State, had different interests that might or might not align with taking over farm operations. His passion for technology and innovation was valuable for modernizing agricultural practices, but his ultimate career goals remained undefined as he explored various applications for his technical skills. The uncertainty about family succession had prompted Emma and me to accelerate planning for organizational structures that could ensure continuity regardless of our children's career choices. The process involved complex legal and financial arrangements that would preserve both the farm's agricultural mission and the foundation's educational work. The solution we developed involved converting the farm operation to a cooperative structure that would provide ownership opportunities for employees and community members, while maintaining family influence over major decisions. The model was inspired by successful agricultural cooperatives in other countries but adapted to our specific circumstances and values. The cooperative structure would allow Catherine and Joe to participate in ownership and leadership as their interests and availability permitted, while also creating opportunities for other family members, employees, and community members to invest in the operation's continued success. James Rodriguez, who had worked with us for over a decade and demonstrated exceptional management skills and commitment to our values, was identified as a potential general manager who could handle day-to-day operations while reporting to a board that included family members and community representatives. Maria Santos, the foundation program graduate who had become a successful farmer in her own right, agreed to serve on the cooperative's board and help guide the transition to shared ownership. Her perspective as both a program beneficiary and independent agricultural entrepreneur provided valuable insights about maintaining mission focus while adapting to new organizational structures. The transition process required 2 years of careful planning and legal work, during which time Catherine completed her fellowship in Rome and returned with expanded understanding of global food systems and international agricultural policy. Her experience had confirmed her commitment to agricultural work, while broadening her vision beyond individual farm operations. Working in Rome showed me how innovative farming practices developed on places like our farm can be scaled and adapted to address food security challenges around the world, she explained during a foundation board meeting. But it also reinforced my appreciation for the community-based approach we've developed here. Policy is important, but real change happens through relationships and local innovation. Joe's college experience had led him toward agricultural technology development, with specific interest in systems that could help small-scale farmers in developing countries access precision agriculture tools that were typically available only to large commercial operations. His senior project involved designing low-cost monitoring systems that could provide soil and weather data to farmers with limited resources, potentially revolutionizing agricultural productivity in regions where small improvements in efficiency could significantly impact food security and economic development. The technology development work aligned perfectly with the Foundation's international partnerships and suggested potential for Joe to contribute to agricultural innovation without necessarily managing farm operations directly. The cooperative transition was completed during the farm's 34th year, with a celebration that included current and former employees, Foundation program graduates, community leaders, and family members who had watched the operation evolve over more than 3 decades. The event was particularly meaningful because it represented the fulfillment of Grandpa Joe's original vision of land stewardship and community responsibility, adapted to contemporary conditions through innovative ownership structures and collaborative management approaches. Tom Hendricks, now in his 80s but still actively involved in farm advisory work, delivered remarks that connected the cooperative transition to agricultural traditions that emphasized mutual support and shared responsibility for land stewardship. "Your grandfather would be proud of what you've accomplished," he told me during the celebration. "But I think he'd be even more proud of how you've ensured that this work will continue long after any individual farmer is gone. The land doesn't belong to any one family. It belongs to the community that cares for it." The cooperative structure proved immediately successful, with shared ownership creating stronger commitment among employees, while generating additional capital for continued expansion and innovation. The model attracted attention from agricultural development organizations and rural communities that were facing similar challenges about succession and sustainability. Catherine's role in the cooperative involved strategic planning and policy advocacy, work that utilized her international experience while maintaining her connection to the local community that had shaped her values and interests. Her position allowed her to split time between the farm and Washington, D.C., where she advised congressional committees about agricultural policy and rural development. Joe's contribution focused on technology development and equipment innovation, with his engineering expertise helping modernize farm operations while creating products that could be marketed to other agricultural cooperatives and small-scale farmers. The combination of Catherine's policy expertise and Joe's technical innovation created synergies that enhanced both the farm's productivity and the Foundation's influence on broader agricultural development initiatives. The most significant test of the cooperative structure came during the farm's 36th year, when global economic instability and climate change-related weather events created the most challenging agricultural conditions since the drought of my early farming years. The crisis required difficult decisions about resource allocation, operational priorities, and financial management that tested the cooperative's decision-making processes and the strength of relationships among the diverse group of owners and stakeholders. The response demonstrated the value of shared ownership and collaborative management, as the broader group of stakeholders brought diverse perspectives and resources to address challenges that might have overwhelmed individual family ownership. James Rodriguez's leadership during the crisis was exceptional, coordinating responses that maintained operational efficiency while preserving employment and community relationships that were central to the cooperative's mission and values. The cooperative's success during difficult conditions attracted additional attention from agricultural policymakers and rural development specialists who were interested in models that could enhance the resilience and sustainability of small-scale agriculture. The recognition led to federal funding for research and demonstration projects that could help other communities develop similar cooperative structures adapted to their specific circumstances and needs. Emma and I gradually transitioned to advisory roles that allowed us to remain involved in strategic planning and mission oversight, while giving primary operational responsibility to the next generation of leaders. The transition felt natural and appropriate, reflecting our confidence in the organizational structures and leadership development that had prepared the cooperative for continued success regardless of our direct involvement. The Foundation's work had expanded to include partnerships with agricultural development organizations in 15 countries, with programs that adapted our beginning farmer and cooperative development models to diverse cultural and economic contexts. The international expansion had created opportunities for Catherine and Joe to contribute to global food security initiatives, while maintaining their commitment to the local community that had provided the foundation for their agricultural education and values. The farm's 40th anniversary provided an opportunity to reflect on 4 decades of agricultural innovation, family growth, and community development that had transformed not just our operation, but the broader understanding of how agricultural heritage could thrive through adaptation and collaboration. The celebration was attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by the cooperative's work, Foundation program graduates from around the world, policymakers who had been influenced by our advocacy efforts, researchers who had studied our models, and community members who had participated in the ownership and governance of the cooperative. Catherine, now 32 and serving as the Foundation's executive director, had become a nationally recognized expert on agricultural cooperatives and rural economic development. Her work influenced policy at state and federal levels while maintaining focus on practical applications that could benefit individual farmers and rural communities. Joe, at 29, had established an agricultural technology company that specialized in precision farming equipment for small-scale operations. His innovations were being used by farmers throughout the Midwest and internationally, creating economic opportunities while supporting sustainable agricultural practices. The most meaningful recognition of our 4 decades of work came from the community itself, as the county established an annual Agricultural Innovation Award in Grandpa Joe's name, recognizing individuals and organizations that demonstrated exceptional commitment to land stewardship and community development. The award acknowledged not just our individual accomplishments, but the broader significance of proving that agricultural heritage could evolve and thrive when supported by innovation, collaboration, and unwavering commitment to values that transcended individual ownership or profit. Emma and I had achieved something that seemed impossible when I first purchased the farm at auction as a young adult struggling with debt and uncertainty. We had created an agricultural operation and educational institution that would continue growing and serving long after our direct involvement ended. The farm that had once been sold without including me in the decision had become a model for agricultural cooperatives, rural economic development, and sustainable farming practices that influenced policy and practice throughout the country and internationally. Looking toward the future, with Catherine and Joe leading the cooperative and foundation into their next phases of development, I felt profound satisfaction knowing that Grandpa Joe's vision of land stewardship and community responsibility had been preserved and adapted for contemporary conditions. The black Iowa soil still ran through my fingers during my morning walks through fields that had been in Kelly hands for over a century, but now it also carried the hopes and commitments of dozens of cooperative members and hundreds of Foundation program graduates who understood that agricultural success required both individual excellence and collaborative responsibility. The transformation from a traditional family farm to an innovative agricultural cooperative had proven that heritage and progress were not contradictory but complementary forces that could create opportunities for multiple generations to contribute to meaningful work. As I stood in the same spot where Grandpa Joe had taught me to read the land 45 years earlier, watching Catherine lead a group of international visitors through our precision agriculture demonstration plots, while Joe tested new monitoring equipment in the research fields, I realized that the greatest success had been creating something that was both deeply rooted in family tradition and completely adapted to contemporary opportunities and challenges. They had sold my grandfather's land without me, treating it as just another financial asset to be optimized for individual return. But I had bought it back and transformed it into something far more valuable. A living demonstration that agricultural heritage could thrive when supported by innovation, collaboration, and commitment to values that prioritized community benefit over individual profit. The farm was no longer just land or even just a business. It was a model for how rural communities could adapt to changing conditions, while preserving the relationships and responsibilities that made agricultural life meaningful and sustainable. Grandpa Joe's simple lesson that, "this dirt has our blood in it," had evolved into a comprehensive understanding that successful agriculture required not just family dedication, but community investment, environmental stewardship, and institutional innovation that could ensure continued productivity and service, long after any individual contribution had ended. The cooperative would continue long after Emma and I were gone, with new members adding their own vision and energy to work that honored the past, while creating opportunities for future generations to build something even better than what we had accomplished. The land would remain productive and meaningful, feeding people and building community through the dedicated stewardship of individuals who understood that agricultural success was measured not just in yields and profits but in the strength of relationships, and the sustainability of practices that connected human communities to the soil that sustained them. The boy who had learned to read the land from his grandfather had grown into a man who helped create institutional structures that would ensure those lessons continued benefiting people he would never meet, working land that would remain productive long after he had returned to the soil that had inspired and sustained his life's work. The circle was complete, but the work would continue, because that was what good land and good people did. They produced abundance, supported community, and created opportunities for the next generation to add their own contributions to the endless project of caring for the earth and each other. As I stood in the same spot where Grandpa Joe had taught me to read the land 45 years earlier, watching Catherine lead a group of international visitors through our precision agriculture demonstration plots while Joe tested new monitoring equipment in the research fields, I realized that the greatest success had been creating something that was both deeply rooted in family tradition and completely adapted to contemporary opportunities and challenges. They had sold my grandfather's land without me, treating it as just another financial asset to be optimized for individual return. But I had bought it back and transformed it into something far more valuable. A living demonstration that agricultural heritage could thrive when supported by innovation, collaboration, and commitment to values that prioritized community benefit over individual profit. I knelt down and let the rich black soil fall through my fingers, just as Grandpa had taught me all those years ago. The dirt still had our blood in it, but now it had something more. The dreams and sweat of dozens of cooperative members, hundreds of foundation graduates, and thousands of visitors who had learned that farming wasn't just about growing crops, but about growing community. The farm was home again, and it always would be. Quote. The end.